has many faces. The man who laughs. The master of Metropolis. The guardian of fear. The conqueror of worlds. Many faces, but just one name. The supervillain. Powerful, charismatic, intelligent, ruthless. The supervillain reflects our fears and frustrations, the dangers and perils of everyday life. They commit the heinous crimes we will not. And in a world where right and wrong are not absolute, where shades of grey exist in life as well as the comic page, evil isn't just unavoidable, it's necessary. In the world of comics, one could argue that the villain is even more vital to the story than the just and moral hero. For without a proper adversary, we lack the very essence of story, conflict. After all, isn't it the villain who catapults the hero into action?
Without the villain, there's really no story, right? The superhero exists and he does nothing.
If the villain isn't acting out, Superman stays Clark Kent.
The superheroes are always reacting. The villains are the ones who are making things happen. The villains are the one with the plan. The villains are the ones who are taking the initiative.
If you define protagonist as somebody who sets something in motion, and antagonist is somebody who stops him, almost all the villains in comic books are protagonists.
You need that ongoing impetus of the bad guy, the villain, the one who's always going to be a challenge, the one who's going to threaten society's rules and be put in their place by somebody who upholds those rules.
Not only is there no story or conflict without the villain, but it's through the villain that we see our hero at their very core. We see their many flaws. We see their many weaknesses. We see what makes them the hero they are.
Without the villain to define the hero, you don't have a hero. You have no anvil from which the superhero is pounded into the shape that he is.
Villains in comic book stories allow the hero or the superhero to really flex her muscles.
And the more power the supervillains have, the more you can showcase how important that superhero is.
So the stronger your villains are, the stronger your hero is. Just because they have to overcome somebody who's smart, powerful, who knows what they want, who's on a mission that they have to do and they believe in. So if the hero can stop them, you know, it makes them that much better.
But all the more true in the DC universe because we have such rich villains.
One of the classic examples is Flash and Reverse Flash. The very names give you what they are.
Reverse Flash suffered something so horrible, and he felt like the Flash could have fixed it. He knew that the Flash could go through time. He's seen it happen before. He said, why don't you go back, prevent this from happening? Why won't you do that? The guy won't do it. Well, he won't do it because he hasn't felt tragedy like I have. So I'm going to have him feel tragedy to make him a better hero. You need to be able to take the measures to protect everyone you love. You wouldn't do it for me, maybe you'll do it for yourself. So let me put you to the test.
The Riddler, he's all about Batman's intellect. You know, he, to me, is the sword sharpener. He's the guy that says, if you are not clever enough, you know, everybody dies in that way. He shows in some ways that Batman, at his roots, needs to still be the greatest detective. At his heart, he's born in Detective Comics, you know, and at the core of the character is that Sherlock Holmes is that guy that, because he's human, needs to be smarter than anybody else to solve these crimes. And for me, the Riddler steps onto the stage and challenges that really, really basic and fundamental element of Batman's capabilities that needs to be there almost more than any other. I mean, that's Batman's superpowers. He's the greatest detective of all time.
The relationship between a villain and their rival is more complicated than a question of right versus wrong, good versus evil. Together they form a dynamic that is at times interdependent. A villain cannot exist without a hero, and a hero is or her villain.
They're very much in a symbiotic relationship in that if the villains were to do off the hero, I think they would probably find themselves a little listless.
When we did the Death of the Family story, he comes at Batman saying, deep down, we really love each other. And of course, Batman's, I hate nothing more on the earth than you, Joker.
The Joker feels that the family that Batman's built around him all these years is dragging him down. And he says, these people are draining your soul. These other members of the Bat family, they're sucking the life out of you. I'm your friend. I want to make you be the best that you can be, so that we can both have a relationship that we could, enjoy for so many years without these, knuckleheads on the side constantly draining you. And so I'm going to take care of them for you, and I'm going to wipe out all these family members so you can be free of their encumbrance.
What the Joker, at his core, is saying is that you might not love us the way that we love you, or you might not want to admit you love us the way that we love you. But this rogues gallery that you have, he's like, all of us love you. All of us are here only to make you a better superhero.
The question always becomes, what came first, the hero or the villain? Did the hero introduce himself to society to do better good, and because they put on that costume, the costume villain arose to confront him and to challenge him? Or did the costume villain arrive first, and the hero was created in order to stop that type of villain from succeeding or getting more powerful?
There are threats, though, like Superman has to face, intergalactic threats, where I would tend to think we're grateful Superman is there. Though on the flip side, some people may say, well, if Superman weren't here, would these menaces be coming to Earth?
Bane comes to Gotham specifically to fight Batman. This is the Riddler, as he originally appeared. First moved to Gotham because he was attracted by the challenge of Batman. They both came there to challenge Batman, to see if he could be a foe worthy of them, give them something interesting to do.
So the question is, which came first? And I'm not sure if I really want to answer that question. The one thing I can say, one can't exist without the other. As long as we have villains, there will be heroes. And as long as we have heroes, there will be villains.
But what is it about the villain that keeps us so entranced, that captivates and enthralls us? What makes us applaud the very person we want to see vanquished? The reasons are often as multifaceted as the villains we enjoy.
You know what makes a great supervillain is something that we can relate to. It's the same thing that makes for a great superhero.
In the superhero, we have this exaggeration of what our hopes and desires are. At the same time, the villain has aspects of us that challenge the strengths that we're admiring in the superhero.
I would like to think that most people identify with the hero, but in this day and age, there might be some who identify with the villain.
I understand getting a gun that shoots ice and going into a bank and trying to rob it.
We understand temptation. The oldest stories ever told have to do with temptation, whether it's Pandora or Adam and Eve. This very basic quality in human beings that runs with us throughout our lives.
Now there are villains like the Joker or Black Hand that are so twisted and dark, you love seeing them do their stuff, but you don't relate to them. At least you don't admit you do.
Everyone wishes that they could turn invisible or fly or have X-ray vision. And I think what's cool about villains is everyone wishes that they could break bad.
What's the point of having a villain who can't act out the aspects of ourselves that we must repress? I can be evil. Listen, I'm going to give you my husband's phone number and you can have a long chat with him.
I think there's some people who really associate themselves with like a Superman. On the other hand, people covet Lex Luthor's keen intellect. When I was growing up, I loved the character of Vandal Savage. DC had relaunched The Flash with Wally West as The Flash after Crisis on Infinite Earths, and his first villain that he fought was Vandal Savage in the first 2 issues. He was immortal, and who wouldn't want to be immortal, and who wouldn't want to have this far reach into history?
He's one of those villains that has nothing to lose. You know, that's a very dangerous man. You know, he just knows he will be resurrected. How do you defeat that person?
You look good. Been working out? You could probably use a little sun. Then again, who am I to talk?
They seem to be happy. They seem to really enjoy being bad. Most of the heroes, especially of late, they're all kind of broody and sad. They never seem to be enjoying anything. But, you know, you look at the villains and they're having the time of their lives.
Harley became popular because, in part, she's funny. She can stand up to the Joker, she can tell a joke, she can get a laugh. When I go to conventions and I see young ladies cosplaying as her, I think they just tap into that feeling of fun, and that she can just be, you know, kind of whimsical.
Harley Quinn certainly is one of those characters you love. Even if she's smashing somebody with a hammer, you still love her. There's a handful of those villains, like Larfleeze, the Orange Lantern. He's deadly, but he's fun. He's overwhelmed with greed, and he'll kill for it. But he's still funny because of that. He comes to Earth, and he finds out there's a being here called Santa Claus who gives people things that you list. So when Larfleeze finds out there's a being called Santa Claus that answers your Christmas list, he makes a giant Christmas list. And then when Santa Claus doesn't show up, he gets pissed off and he says, I'm gonna kill him. And he goes on a hunt for Santa Claus. There's very few characters that you can pull that story off with. Larfleeze is one of those characters.
But while villains can be fun as well as fascinating, they're also a direct reflection of our own fears. They force us to examine the deep and personal terrors that we are unable to face in our everyday lives.
When writers create supervillains, when children imagine monsters, they're trying to make sense of a scary world, they're trying to feel strong, they're trying to do so many things.
Villains, in some ways, you know, should reflect our fears and our concerns, you know, both as individuals and as society. They change over time. The more important thing that villains present is our more global fear, our more human fear, our fear of loss, our fear of death, our fear of the unknown.
The villain represents basically everything that we fear or everything that we need to fight against.
Parallax is interesting because the idea that it's a world eater, that scares the hell out of us. At any moment, some universal malevolence can come and take us over. That's a pretty scary thing.
By the time they were doing the Superman animated show, I was already an adult. But whenever you'd watch those Dark Side episodes, I'd always be like, oh God, this is going to be bad. You know, anybody who can make Superman bleed, you know, is somebody that, you know, you don't want to be trifled with. Because what are any of us really going to do against him?
I really made Sinestro and the Sinestro Corps embody fear. They were cosmic terrorists. Their mission when they come down here is destroy Coast City. We're going to make Green Lantern's town a crater and a symbol of fear so that nobody will ever come back here. And Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps says, we're not afraid. We're going to fight your fear. Hal flies to his brother's house, and his brother is there with his wife and his kids. Hal Jordan says to his brother, you have to leave right now. And his brother says, we're not going anywhere. Like, we believe in you. We're not afraid. We're standing our ground. And suddenly another Green Lantern says, Hal, look outside. And someone's put a green light in their window, and another person puts a green light in their window, and then another person, and suddenly there's green lights all throughout the city as a symbolic gesture to Hal. And for me, that was a recharge moment for Hal Jordan, overcoming fear, but it was also a moment emotionally for me saying like this is how we deal with fear. We take a stand.
There are personal demons, like they're the fears that we have about ourselves, come to life in these incredibly colorful and bright and sometimes funny, sometimes terrifying ways. And all of us face those things in our lives where you face adversity in some way where you're positive you're not going to make it through this one, you know, and I think we've all been there at some point where you're just thinking to yourself, I am not capable of overcoming this, whether it's a small day-to-day thing or it's a big thing. And what villains do is they represent those fears on this macro way, I think, for the hero, who's the representative of all the things we hope that humanity is capable of or we're capable of in our best. And when the hero overcomes those things at the end because they have to, it says to us that we can too.
Every myth has a creation. Just like our heroes, every villain must have an origin. And what qualities do we see in the most popular villains? Instilling a sense of fear simply isn't enough. Villains must be layered, nuanced. We must ask ourselves, what makes a bad guy a bad guy?
You want to give your villain idiosyncrasies, and you want to make him strangely weird and interesting psychologically.
Those kind of characters lend themselves to having stories told about them because their bones are so strong. You can put, you can hang a lot of meat on them.
They have their own path, and they all have their own story. And, while their powers may be similar, hopefully their personalities are not.
If a villain is great looking or is great just visually, but doesn't have a backstory, it really takes away from enjoying its run.
The wonderful thing about Batman the Animated Series is that they not only featured and celebrated a number of DC villains in Gotham City, but introduced a number of origin stories. Of course, we have this backstory of Harvey Dent and his struggles with his anger. We even get to see this session he has with a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist puts him into this state of hypnotism and asks him to draw up his alter ego. He calls it Big Bad Harvey. Later in the episode, of course, we see his full development into Two-Face. And I'll never forget that moment where he breaks open the door out of his hospital room. He then turns at the same time that there's lightning, and we see the image of the second half of his face.
Black Hand really came into his own in Green Lantern 43 when his origin was revealed.
Taking a character like Black Hand, who was a minor Green Lantern villain, and looking at him and saying, well, if we have an emotional spectrum and all the colors represent life, the absence of color has to represent death. There's got to be a black in there. Black Hand, by becoming the avatar of death, having a black ring, committing suicide to become a zombified Black Lantern, which is, I think, one of the best moments Doug Mackey's ever drawn in his life. It's creepy, twisted, dark.
Once people actually got to get inside his head a little bit and see who he was, then it became much more of a connection.
A hero's motive is usually straightforward. Save the day, serve justice, defeat evil. Villains, however, are driven by a variety of forces. It could be as grandiose as taking over the world, or as direct as forcing others to share their agony. They can be much more complex, personal, and often even relatable.
What makes a villain the most memorable is the reason they're doing whatever it is they do. It's not the crime. We've seen 100,000 crimes. We've seen Luthor break into banks. We've seen all these characters do weird things, but why they do it.
Every one of us is driven by, our own singular, needs and wants, so we're villains.
A character like the Anti-Monitor from Crisis on Infinite Earths needs to absorb all the universes, and that's the only way he could survive.
Behold the definition of true power.
He's not doing it because he cares at all about life, and that makes him frightening because you can't reason with him. He's not an intellect that you can talk to and say, don't you realize you're doing something really bad? Can't we figure out something else to do? He's not interested. He has one need.
When I created Clayface 3 at the behest of the late, great Julie Schwartz, I came up with a character who was a monster because he had screwed up. He was someone born with acromegaly, essentially the elephant man disease, and trying to fix himself became somebody who basically could draw the calcium out of your body and reduce people to little clay-like masses. But he didn't want to. It's just how he survived.
There may also be certainly revenge involved.
A lot of villains feel that they've been wronged in some way, whether it's by society or a loved one or the police.
With Mr. Freeze, when we developed the character for Batman the Animated Series, I thought, you know, somebody that cold has to be that cold for a reason.
Essentially, he had some funding to carry out his research to cure his wife, Nora. And the man who pulled that funding, he then became the focus of Mr. Freeze's evil doing. His mission is to go after the one man who took away the love of his life. He actually says to Batman, this is my sole purpose, and if you get in the way, you'll pay for it. Which kind of implies, like, look, if you just step aside, I won't harm you.
There's a villain, you can argue whether he's a villain or not, Atrocitus, who he was motivated by anger at the Guardians of the Universe. His family got killed because the Guardians of the Universe, they created these manhunters, androids, which were their predecessors to the Green Lantern Corps. Atrocitus skips over the denial stage of grief, goes straight into anger and stays there. Forget going into the later ones. The only bargain he makes is to stay angry and avenge his family by going after the Guardians however he can.
That's why the Joker is so interesting, because he sort of doesn't have a motive.
He knows he's crazy. Most of the crazy villains, most of the villains who, in comics, who are insane, have no idea they are. But the Joker is aware of it, and he loves it. He loves the concept that he is chaos to Batman's logic and order.
And obviously we have the most recent incarnation on the big screen. Heath Ledger's Joker is a perfect example of that. And he even says it. He's a dog chasing a car, and when he catches it, he doesn't know what he's doing. He just sort of does things.
With Lex Luthor, he just wants power, but how does he attain it? How many ways does he have to go? Why is he jealous of Superman? Oh, because he wants to be more powerful than Superman.
Those self-made men tend to feel that they have license, tend to feel that they're superior to everybody else.
He has these personality characteristics that one would consider narcissistic, in the sense that he has this element of superiority, that he is more powerful than others, thinks that he's more intelligent than others, and therefore believes that he deserves more than what other people deserve.
He is like the pinnacle of humanity. He has made himself the best man. And then there's this alien that's better than him.
I did the revision of Luthor back in the 1980s. I turned him into a character who brought jobs to Metropolis. He provided museums and philharmonic orchestras and did all this stuff as long as everyone knew he was the best. He wanted the power, he wanted the control, and he was happy. He was delighted because everyone honored him.
And then Superman came along, who could fly. It was ego. I am the person who looks down on everybody else. And the first time Superman and he meet, Superman says, I'll be around. You want to find me? Just look up. And suddenly there was somebody who was over Luthor, and he couldn't deal with that.
I think that's also part of the ego, is that villains love to hear themselves talk. They love to hear their theories as expounded upon by themselves.
The Penguin made a comment in one comic book. What's the point in committing the perfect crime if no one knows it was you who did it?
Lex Luthor's brain, as evil as it is brilliant. Once he had him and he was incapacitated to the degree that Lex could do anything he wanted with him, he could grandize himself in front of him. Let me tell you how brilliant I am.
You were great in your day, Superman. But it just stands to reason. When it came time to cash in your chips, this old, diseased maniac would be your banker. Mind over muscle?
The grandiose nature of the villains figures into every one of those key aspects. You know, whatever their mission is in life, the main thing they want to do. You know, the one who wants to get the money, he wants to do it in the outlandish way, the creative, different way.
When you think of some of the more flamboyant villains in the DC universe, you sort of think about, like, you know, would they really be happy with all the money in the world? You know, would they really be happy with running the city? You know, it seems to be they're much happier trying to take the city than actually having it. I don't think that's what you see. That's why you don't see a lot of books about, like, supervillains, like, well, now running City Hall, or now I'm the mayor, or, you know, what are they going to do with $1 billion? So I do think it's sort of more the pursuit.
It's not enough for the Riddler to rob a bank or steal a diamond. He's got to drop clues on his way to robbing a bank or stealing a diamond. The Riddler's probably the most self-defeating villain in the history of comic books because he's always providing Batman with a clue to his comeuppance.
He's obviously got some deep, dark, damaged psychological reason that, you know, deep down he wants to be caught. He wants to be punished. Otherwise he wouldn't leave these ridiculous riddles to be left for, you know, Batman to solve.
The journey toward evil follows a long road with many possible avenues. But for the fallen, the question remains, were they born bad? Or did they willingly turn down the dark path? Is it the end result of a lifetime of suffering? Or did one horrible incident forever push them over the edge?
Is there real evil? Does evil in itself really exist? Or is it always a reaction to something? Is it a reaction to some childhood trauma?
There are a number of different, I guess, causes or trajectories toward evil doing or toward a life of villainy.
The best villains probably are born bad. You want them to be, at least. But I think there's always, like, maybe they were born bad and then you had those horrible incidents occur that sort of kept them down that path.
We have yet really to have true examples of these particular experiences that the Joker, Harvey Dent, and other villains have gone through. So there is, I think there's a lot of room for the fictional writing and the fictional exploration of one event creating, completely redefining a person where it turns them to villains.
I created a character called Man-Bat. It's this guy who is a Batman fan. He's a genius. He's a scientist. Works in museums. But he's just a little off. And he thinks that if he creates a serum out of bats, that he can give it as a gift to Batman, and Batman will have the attributes of a bat. Wouldn't that be great? But somebody has to test it. So he tests it on himself. It's Jekyll and Hyde. He's turned into this creature. He becomes a Man-Bat. You can say, well, Man-Bat is a villain. No, he's not a villain. He can be manipulated by villains, but he's a good guy. In fact, he loves Batman. He thinks Batman is the greatest hero on earth, and he wants to be like Batman. But if he's like Batman, he becomes a drug addict and becomes this monster.
You will bow down before me! Both you, and then one day, your heirs!
General Zod is a fantastic villain for Superman. While some of his actions aren't justifiable, you completely understand why he is the man he is.
You know, someone like the Scarecrow, the fact that he was bullied into submission and picked on by way more powerful people than him, and he was so scared to live his life because he had this constant air of fear around him. It drove him to figure out why that fear existed within him, and then at the end of the day, how he could inflict it upon other people.
You're writing it and you see, why can't you just go left instead of right at this seminal moment? And that kind of story, I think, is equally inspiring and exciting to read for different reasons, but because mostly you see that making the wrong choice or falling victim to sort of difficult circumstances and letting them turn you and twist you that way is something that gets you nowhere but Blackgate or Arkham or, you know, one of the, you know, the Phantom Zone or that sort of thing.
Consider this. The function and role of the hero and the villain is all simply a matter of perspective. If we reversed focus and considered the story from the point of view of the villain, wouldn't they be the hero and the hero the villain?
You have to think that pretty much everyone's a hero in their own story. The villains who are really interesting characters have an affirmative reason for what they're doing.
Their strength comes from absolute certainty, 100% certainty that they are correct. If they're uncertain about what they're doing, then they're not interesting characters.
Perspective of ants. You know, do ants see us as giant villains? We're walking around, it's ruining my picnic, so I'm just stomping out on these ants and I'm not thinking anything. But, you know, to someone's point of view down there, we are these giant gods who are villainous and are destroying their civilization. So it's really just about your point of view.
Sinestro, he wanted to control things so much on Korrigar, his home world. He wanted to be safe for everybody that he started to instill fear, like, I'm in control.
Sinestro is a villain who really did see himself as a hero and couldn't believe that he was being chopped off at the knees by the Guardians all the time and being perceived to be someone who wasn't looking out for the better interests of the universe and his own people. And eventually it pushed Sinestro into a dark place where he finally just had to use his powers to bring to light what he thought was the best thing.
And Hal Jordan ultimately had to stop this guy who had gone renegade.
So it set them on a collision course.
Lex doesn't perceive himself as a bad person. He doesn't perceive himself as anything but the agent of order and civilization.
You hold the future of the entire planet in your hands. I'm here to take it back.
Lex?
You'll never threaten the world again.
I think Luthor's correct in the way he views the world. He's right. Superman's an alien and we shouldn't trust him.
He has a lot of people on his side today in that I think in the 50s, during the Eisenhower years, the idea of a Superman with all these incredible powers that we can't stop even if we wanted to, but he's a benign force for good, that's reassuring. In today's day and age, I don't know if that's as reassuring. So the idea that there's a guy who is a businessman, you know, a tycoon who's looking out for his fellow humans against a threat that actually can't be contained or controlled, I don't know. I think it really speaks to, a lot of people's fears about authority and power today.
In modern story, just as it is in life, the choice between right and wrong often isn't so cut and dry. Heroes are flawed, sometimes villains justified, but it's the villain and sometimes society itself that further blurs the line.
In the same way there's a thin line between love and hate, to me, the best heroes are the ones that probably act a little villainous, and the best villains are the ones that might have martyr complexes.
Where we are in comics right now, we probably examine the line between good and evil a lot more than ever been done before.
Batman is always sort of trying to maintain that control within himself. You know, this is how my parents were killed. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else.
He is a guy who's fighting to not become a bad guy.
Had it not been for the humanizing anchors of his humanity, Alfred, and a few other key people, keeping him in line, young Bruce Wayne, traumatized by witnessing the murder of his parents before his eyes, could easily have gone the dark side of that line.
All I've ever wanted to do is kill him. A day doesn't go by when I don't think about subjecting him to every horrendous torture he's dealt out to others, and then end him. But if I do that, if I allow myself to go down into that place, I'll never come back.
There's sort of a power struggle going on with the villains, too.
There's the character that's sort of more of a gray nature, who was originally maybe intended to be a villain, who cleaned up his act a little bit, or who is just so engaging that you like him a lot. You look at a character like Lobo, for instance. Here's this guy who should not be called a hero by any stretch of the imagination, but he's got just enough honor, I guess you'd say. He's a bounty hunter. And if he goes after somebody, for better or for worse, he'll honor the deal and he'll go and track down the guy and bring him in.
The appeal of Lobo is just the over-the-top black comedy and violence I think the character brings.
You know, he's a badass biker from outer space. You know, who doesn't love somebody like that?
Deadshot is nice and simple and clear. He's like a bullet. He goes from point A to point B and he doesn't waver.
He's got layers to him. He's not just doing this for the sake of fun. He's doing it because this is the thing he's good at. He's good at killing people, and he only does it for money.
With a character like Deathstroke, I actually did not create him to be a villain. I created him thinking he was a character who was morally ambiguous, who was doing certain things for his own reasons. He was a hunter, he was a mercenary, he was an assassin, but always on a political for hire basis. And then because his son was trapped by the hive, he was forced into becoming a villain. He didn't want to be. And no matter how many times he wants to get out of it, he can't, because he has a certain code of ethics that says he promised to complete his son's mission, and he can't stop until he does, even though he knows it's not his mission, and even though he knows it's wrong.
Amanda Waller is one of the greatest characters in DC Comics. She is the Black Ops government leader of the Suicide Squad, the program that recruits supervillains and forces them to do missions for them. And she is manipulative, super smart.
Amanda Waller can only be viewed as a bad guy because she makes the tough choices. That's the reason why. And what she's doing is she is willing to sacrifice the individual for the greater good.
Amanda Waller continues to be a presence in the DC universe. She's created a Justice League called the Justice League of America that is designed to take out the real Justice League if need be. She's always prepared for the worst because she's experienced the worst.
She has a very clear moral line, and whether you agree with it or not, it doesn't shift. So therefore, that's why you'll have that level of discussion going back and forth of whether or not Amanda Waller is a hero or a villain.
Heroes typically have a strong moral code. I will not kill. I will uphold the law. But just because villains commit crimes does not mean they are completely without principles. There does exist honor among thieves, even if that honor is warped and twisted.
I don't think you can generalize about villains the same way as you can't generalize about heroes across the board. You know, I do think that there are some villains who have a moral code or have a line that they personally will not cross.
Two-Face, where he basically lets his morality be decided by a flip of a coin.
Sinestro certainly has a code of ethics he thinks he's following. And in a strange way, he is following it. He believes in the Green Lantern Corps so much, he's willing to be a villain to them.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am he who is called Ra's al Ghul.
Ra's al Ghul knows who Batman is. He can give it away. And he doesn't because there's sort of a respect that he has for Batman. And he has this hope that one day Batman will come to his side, so he doesn't destroy Batman that way.
Specifically, the rogues, they won't kill somebody. Like, that's where they draw the line. They do have their own, you know, maybe a warped code, but they have their code.
If you go to the rogues and say, you have a chance to kill the Flash, here's the master plan, this is how we're going to kill the Flash. Once and for all, we're going to kill the Flash. Captain Cope would be like, you're out of your mind. We kill the Flash, the whole Justice League's on top of us. We don't need that right now. We have this thing going. We don't want to kill the Flash. He's just in our way. There's versions of the rogues where they've been more bloodthirsty, and they're versions I don't necessarily respond to because I don't think that's who the rogues are. The last thing they would ever do is kill the Flash. That doesn't mean they're uninteresting characters to watch or uninteresting characters for the Flash to go up against. That makes them more interesting because they want to do different things. What are their motivations?
The best villains represent the counterpoint to the hero. A polar opposite in many respects, but also bearing subtle or sometimes striking similarities. The villain is often merely the hero's dark reflection, the result of a divergent path, a different road taken.
I think a good nemesis for a hero needs to have some of the hero in him, have some of the qualities of the hero in him. You are defined as much by the dark side of the mythology as you are defined by the light side of mythology. So for every mythology about demons, there need to be angels and vice versa.
You need to have a degree of polar opposite, and at the same time there needs to be those things that make the mirror images of themselves.
And you have Ocean Master, who is kind of a mirror of Aquaman. He is an Atlantean king like Aquaman, but he's Aquaman gone wrong. He's what if Aquaman went down a different path. In the case of Flash, it's reverse Flash. Literally, it's a reverse version of the Flash, a mirror of him. And then the opposite would be Captain Cold, who, because on first blush, you're like, oh, it's ice, so what, he slips? And you look at Captain Cold and you analyze him a little bit more. When they introduced him, he was called the man who mastered absolute zero. And absolute zero means zero atomic motion. That means the atoms do not move. You know, when things are colder, they're slower on the atomic level. So that's why Captain Cold, to me, always captured the essence of an opposite of the Flash.
You look at somebody like Batman. Catwoman is certainly the sexual challenge to him. Riddler is the intellectual challenge. Penguin is almost a mockery of what Bruce Wayne is on the social scene. And the Joker is the horrific version of what Batman is to ordinary people. Whereas Batman scares criminals, Joker scares and horrifies the ordinary people.
Black Adam is another good opposite number character. Kind of got a costume that's similar to Shazam's costume, but it's black. He's also another member of a police force that has kind of fallen from grace. The Wizards Protector Society, which is what Shazam is and what Black Adam was.
The crime syndicate characters that have been around for decades, they come from a version, a parallel Earth, a version of our Earth, where everyone who's good is bad and everyone who's bad is good. And so you've got an evil Superman and Ultraman. Then you have Owlman, who's a dark version of Batman, and Superwoman, who's a dark version of Wonder Woman. You have Johnny Quick and Power Ring. Power Ring's this twisted Green Lantern who's a coward. The crime syndicate represent the Justice League completely flipped on its head, and if they were horrible, horrible, evil people.
In terms of what they can accomplish and who they can defeat, they're on a par with the Justice League. But their goals are so perverted compared to the honor and the morality that the Justice League have.
Which leaves the governments of the world with two choices: bow down to us or die.
The best supervillains that resonate the most, they do it on two levels. They do it how they psychologically reflect or challenge your superhero, and then also in the story what they've done to affect the superhero's life.
If there's not that personal connection, it just weakens it. It just becomes another person trying to do something dastardly.
When they're really well paired, the villain's been able to get inside the superhero's head. It's almost as if he knows precisely what makes them vulnerable, what their greatest fear is.
When they make it personal, and when they can make it personal, when the villains have the knowledge to make it personal and know your inner secrets, that's when things get real.
Talia al Ghul, she fell in love with Batman, and so when it comes to the point of killing Batman many times in many stories, she draws the line there. She will not kill him. She wants him for her own.
Star Sapphire was not only Hal Jordan's boss, but also girlfriend. And when she was manipulated, she did not know consciously that she had become Star Sapphire. Then you've got this interesting dynamic of when he ultimately finds out that this is his girlfriend, and he's got to battle her. And how does he battle her when she's so smart without hurting her?
That kind of conflict of people who were once friends and become enemies. You know, it's almost like the Greek tragedies, these enormous stories of betrayal.
I just ended my run with Green Lantern 20, and as I was wrapping it up, the story kind of organically revolved around not only Hal, but Hal and Sinestro, and that relationship is really key to Green Lantern to me. Is there's this moment where Sinestro, who blames the Guardians of the Universe, who founded the Green Lantern Corps, who have done all these horrible things against the Corps they created. They try to destroy it. They're ultimately the big bad guys of the piece, and Sinestro vows to destroy them. I'm going to kill them one by one. And Hal says, I can't let you do that. And he grabs him. And Sinestro says, you think they can still be saved? You think that they can be redeemed? And Hal says, this isn't about them, this is about you. He says, I want to save you. You don't have to lower yourself to this level. You don't have to kill them. You can be a great Green Lantern. And he goes, because I believe in you. And Sinestro looks at him and he says, Jordan, it's too late. I've already killed them. And you reveal that Sinestro's already wiped out the Guardians one by one by one. And Sinestro's like, I'm leaving forever. But before I go, like, you had a question you wanted to ask me, and Hal says, you know, were we ever friends, Sinestro? And Sinestro, who's never called him by his first name, he's always called him Jordan, says, you know, that's the tragedy of all this, Jordan. He goes, Hal, We'll always be friends.
Might is not reserved solely for the just. While heroes can exhibit incredible strength or skills, villains may possess abilities equal to, or even greater, than their foes. It's not enough for villains merely to offer a challenge to the heroes, but rather they must present the all-too-real possibility that good might not triumph over evil.
You're defined by the height of the mountain you climb, and so the higher the mountain, the more the epic struggle it is to climb that, the greater the adventure, the greater the hero.
If I have the powers of the gods, then am I not a god myself?
A good villain, you have to believe that he can win. If you have Superman fighting a common mugger, that's not interesting. You know that Superman's going to win. The idea that Lex Luthor can outthink Superman, that he's smarter than Superman, and no matter what Superman's powers are, Lex Luthor can think of a way to defeat him, makes that dynamic between the pair of them brilliant.
It's why we created Ra's al Ghul. You need a Moriarty for a Sherlock Holmes. If Sherlock Holmes is superior to every criminal out there, what's his value? So we want Sherlock Holmes to have a Moriarty. We want Batman to have a Ra's al Ghul. And we want it to be neck and neck.
Superman has all his powers because he's on Earth. And watching Zod discover that he has those same powers, I think Superman and Zod could fight for centuries. And it basically just comes down to the person that's going to win that fight is the person who puts the most heart into it.
When I was writing Superman at one point, I created a character called Mongol, who's become very big in the mythos since. Basically because I felt, all right, this is silly. You've got a guy here who moves planets, and he has to fight a guy he has to outsmart to beat. What about somebody who can kick his butt? So I came up with Mongol, who was bigger and stronger and taller, and to give somebody a physical challenge. Somebody Superman has to work to beat just on a hands-on basis.
Darkseid is a great villain just because of the amount of power that he holds. He's godlike, and it's not easy to fight him and come back alive. Going up against a character like Darkseid really proves your hero's worth.
The Anti-Monitor he's one of those characters like Darkseid, one of our cosmic level villains. He's a force of nature, a force of danger. Darkseid or the Anti-Monitor can literally cross time and space, and they represent a threat that, again, only a hero such as a Superman or a hero of that level can face, and that's why they are almost more frightening. But again, to an earlier point, that's why we need a Superman, because they have to deal with these threats that we as common people can't.
In a battle of equals, the outcome always remains uncertain. And on occasion, fortune favors the fiendish. The villain escapes scot-free. They get their lucky break, or manage to land the killing blow. What does it mean when the hero falls in battle and the villain emerges victorious?
If it's all too clean and too neat, why are we continuing to buy books? Why are we continuing to read these stories if we don't have the sense that there's a certain danger or a mortal danger to our hero?
You know, we have a very clear statement. We said, you know, the hero has to win every time. The villain only has to win once.
Even though we want ultimate good to triumph over evil, there will be battles along the way where there are setbacks.
The question of can the villain succeed is always a tricky one. I believe they can, but obviously you have to make certain that you're careful the extent of it.
There are different kinds of villains and thus different kinds of impact to what a villain does. Most of the criminal villains, the guys who are just out there to rob a bank or do whatever, don't leave lasting impact. The ones like the Joker potentially can affect an entire series.
Don't you just love a happy ending?
One of the risks of being a superhero is that the people that you love, whether they're superheroes themselves or citizens, you put them at risk. And so with Jason Todd, essentially that is what happened, where the Joker murders him. And we have one of these rare instances where a primary character was murdered. For Batman, that meant incredible guilt, that meant feeling that he was responsible for the death, and that was what the Joker essentially wanted.
I always loved Black Manta. You never knew his real name. He had that helmet that covered his face. He killed Aquaman's baby. You have to be a real sick, cold bastard to kill a baby. It felt so horrific to me that I couldn't do anything but look at this character and go, this is the coldest guy in the DC universe.
In a lot of ways, I think Black Manta to Aquaman is very much akin to what Bane is to the Batman. Both characters were very capable and did cause great harm and pain to the main characters.
When Bane broke Bruce Wayne's back, it was proof positive to all the readers around the world that, yes, you got this right all these years. This is a superhero who has no superpowers, who arguably his greatest superpower is his humanity, who is vulnerable, whom you can identify with because he has no superpowers. And now, maybe for the first time, we're taking that one extra step. We are crossing the Rubicon, and we are showing you, and his back is broken, and Batman is either dead or incapacitated.
And I think readers still remember that, and readers still have a visceral reaction to that. This is someone who could hurt Batman. This is someone, I'm sure Batman, even in his calmest nights, wakes up and thinks, this is a guy who once really severely hurt me. This is a guy who's still out there. So I think that's why Bane still has that kind of attraction to readers.
What Bane was to Batman, Doomsday was to Superman, the embodiment of brutal physical force.
This is the great fear Superman has, having a foe that he cannot find a way to stop one way or another.
He was designed to kill Superman. Every time he dies, he comes back stronger, with whatever killed him now no longer something that can kill him.
Doomsday stirs up massive chaos and delivers the hero his biggest defeat ever. Doomsday kills Superman.
I can't think of another villain where his appearance on the stage is enough that, you know, the world is shaking.
I would even argue that the death of Superman's story itself isn't even a story. It's just a fight scene. The story comes from how the world reacts afterwards. When you get to see the funeral for a friend, you see what Superman meant to the world, which reflected what the real world did a lot when they thought we were really going to leave Superman dead. They went crazy sad.
Anytime you have that level of tragedy impacting a DC character, we go through and show the repercussions of that act and how it affects the relationships between all the heroes and the impact it has on all their friends and family. And so to me, it's not done lightly.
We don't have last episodes. We have the next episode, and we do have to deal with that, the repercussions. And again, if the bad guys are winning too often, then that hero doesn't deserve his own title, and he should probably stop being a hero.
Superman died, but that wasn't what the story was about. His death was a piece of that story. It was almost the beginning of the story. And then Dan Jurgens and Mike Carlin, all those guys created Reign of the Superman, which is all about Superman's return. With Batman breaking his back, it was the same thing. How strong is Bruce Wayne? His back's broken, but the city still needs him. So he heals himself and comes back as Batman. He overcomes that. But sometimes the villains do win, but it's only momentarily.
Any general can tell you it's not the battles, it's the ultimate war. And I think if you look at the grand scope of the DC universe, it is ultimately good triumphing over evil. I think the best stories, the stories that kind of last with you, are the ones that, even though good wins, there's a price to be had for that victory.
I don't consider the hero having a victory if it doesn't come at a cost. They have to have something sacrificed, either personal or physical, that occurs every time they win. They have to be giving up something of what they are in order to help mankind. They are making a sacrifice every time they put that costume on. They're making a sacrifice every time they're confronting something and putting themselves at risk. So therefore, there should be something given up in their social life, their personal life, about who they are, and they should be a little more broken because of what they've done, and the only thing that keeps them going is the sense that they're doing something for the better good and for helping other people.
In the history of comics, DC in particular, there are not hundreds, there are thousands of supervillains. Thousands of supervillains. And there's no way we can talk about all of them. We can only talk about a fraction of them.
I think that the very fact that we have such a wide variety of villains that can be anything from, essentially what is a high-tech bank robber to someone like Darkseid, who is a new god, is something I think strengthens our whole universe. It gives us, a great spectrum of villainy.
This spectrum of evil is diverse and dynamic, falling into a vast array of villainous categories and characteristics. Indeed, the tropes and commonalities of villainy are far-reaching. First off is the uncontrollable beast that rages and rains down destruction on those unfortunate souls caught in its path, the monster.
My favorite monsters, the classic monsters, the reason that they're enduring and scary is because they look like people that you love or that you care about or that you trust, your neighbors, your wife, your mother, and then something infects them or turns them into something that's an unstoppable, horrifying force.
Probably the most illustrious monster of the golden age of comics was Solomon Grundy.
He's an animated corpse. The heroes, even Batman, at times is okay with trying to destroy Grundy because he's dead already.
I like Bizarro Superman because he's just so off the wall. I mean, he's like just sort of a crazy, super powerful, almost Frankenstein monster version of Superman.
A villain as old as literature, but only heightened by the advent of the atomic bomb. The mad scientist reflects our mistrust and fear of technology, of advances that could undo us as a people.
New inventions come along that could be the most wonderful boon for humanity, or it could mean the seeds of their destruction. So it figures that mad scientists would be one of the true fears incorporated into the personified forms of supervillains. Dr. Savannah was a cackling, bald, bespectacled scientist who usually could be seen in a white coat. And he was responsible continually for the near demise of Shazam.
Before there was a Dr. Savannah for Lex Luthor, there was the Ultra-Humanite, who was sort of like the very first mad scientist. He could put his brain into other people's bodies, and there was consciousness in other people's bodies. So I believe at one time he was a beautiful woman. He was different people throughout his history, and now he's like a white ape-like creature.
Charmed, I'm sure.
But that just goes to show the power of the mind over the matter. It doesn't matter what you look like on the outside, as long as that brain survives, that brain is going to be trouble for you.
A militant general, a despot, a conqueror. This is a villain not far removed from our world's own tyrants. We know them as the dictator, or more simply, the overlord.
I have a duty to my people, and I will not allow anyone to prevent me from carrying it out. With Zod, it's a pure power thing. There's something very moving about the fact that this story begins with him basically seeing his entire planet explode, like his home evaporate into nothing. I can't imagine a bigger launching off point for a character. And then knowing that he'll do whatever he can to make a new Krypton because he can't help himself. It's the only option he has. It's what he was born to do. It's what he's been training to do his whole life.
He's fighting for Krypton, for his people. And he's a warrior. And so he's capable of committing like horrific crimes against humanity and or anything living.
Starro the Conqueror is an alien starfish, giant starfish that comes down on Earth and seizes control city by city. And then in terms of seizing their minds, it was right out of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Culled from our own mob-laden underworld, the criminal mastermind is both power-hungry and immoral. Feeding their insatiable desire for control, they keep the public in fear as they tighten their grasp on their domain.
Certainly one of the great types of villains is the criminal mastermind, the guy who holds an entire city or town or village or whatever in a grip of fear.
The Penguin has what is informally known as a Napoleon complex, the small man who wants to be big. If he could lose any of that weight, he wouldn't, because it helps him take up more space. You know, his hat makes him taller. His umbrella, when it's extended, helps him take up more area. From the very first story he appears in, wants to rise up in high society and wants to be a crime boss. A number of stories feature him running for mayor, not because he wants to do something great for Gotham, because he wants that status. He wants the power that goes with it, and he wants the status to be the big man over everybody else in Gotham.
The criminal mastermind is sort of an extension of the real mob crime organizations or crime families that have been a part of American history, almost since, the country was founded. That's a great character for comics because you can take that into the area of caricature. Currently, guys like Black Mask. What's more hideous than a guy in this, awful-looking skull mask, wearing a business suit, commanding a legion of street troopers? I mean, that's a great foe for Batman. To guys like Penguin, Black Mask, they're out to really dominate the city. They want to be the distorted, hideous, grotesque face of Gotham City.
Can we get some girls in here?
Careful what you wish for.
The apple on the tree, the seductive siren song of the temptress, the femme fatale. The femme fatale crystallizes the qualities of both a villain and a love interest, all at the same time.
You can find roots in movies. You can find the actresses who maybe inspired some of the villainesses who were created. And these were women who used their beauty to lure the hero in, to get the hero to do their bidding. And that, of course, was reflected in the comics. It was part of the inherent popular culture.
Poison Ivy is a great example of a female villain who will actually take advantage of knowing that the male characters, the male heroes, and even the male villains that she's working with are the ones susceptible to love, to connecting with her. And she uses those assumptions for her own gain. She finds that her power is in essentially taking advantage of other people's vulnerability to emotions.
She took everything that could be seen as objectification towards women and then used it as her own power and turns it around on the guys.
She's very interested in controlling people. Harley Quinn is a case of love gone bad. The individual who's fascinated with these supervillains, fascinated with their egos and their qualities, and Joker plays to that.
So Harleen Quinzel is a woman who is a psychiatry intern, essentially, at Arkham Asylum.
When Bruce Timm and I wrote the origin for her in Mad Love, then we really got into her personality, that she wanted to write a tell-all book about Gotham's psychotic criminals, and then wound up falling under the sway of one and becoming one herself.
She wants the toughest case possible. And who's the toughest case? It's the Joker. And there's this connection that they have together. And I do think there's an element of manipulation on his end, that I think he fancies her, but also that he's realizing that here's an opportunity for him to get out of Arkham Asylum.
Harley's a bit of a social chameleon. She molds herself to the people around her. When she hangs out with heroes, she's more heroic. When she hangs out with villains, she's more villainous. When she's with the Joker, she's more murderous than she is at other times.
Some of the villainesses that we have in the DC universe are almost more powerful than the villains.
The sky's the limit as far as female villains are concerned.
See someone like Cheetah, who is just crazy ferocious.
With the Cheetah, I wanted to create somebody who resonated with Wonder Woman, with Diana, and we added kind of a backstory is that they were friends, and then ultimately she became the Cheetah, and Wonder Woman later learned she was never really her friend. it was all just a play, and it was a bond of trust that was broken. And the cheetah has turned into this savage creature that wants to destroy humanity as much as Wonder Woman wants to protect it.
At this point in time, I think we're lucky enough to be in an era where there is a lot more equality. And you're getting some great stories. They can be defined by what their plot is, what their motive is, what their goals are, what their methods are. And that's great that you don't simply have to define them by gender.
The female villain, historically goes back all the way to Greek mythology. You look at a character like Hera, for instance, who is both a heroine and a villain, depending on the story. Other female villains throughout time have a lot of that same complexity to them. You look at a character like Catwoman, for instance. In her original incarnation, I believe she was just an adventurer. She was out there being a burglar and a jewel robber simply because of the thrill of it. We began learning more about her in the 80s, what her past might have been, and that's certainly made her more of a complex and more of a sympathetic character. And then to the present day, where she is, I believe, one of the members of the Justice League. So she's gone all the way from being villain to anti-hero to straight-on heroine.
She's very curious to us. She has that duality of both good and evil. And I think that allows her to be relatable. I think that she's the most realistic.
It was just interesting to see this strong female character. And she was a precursor, I think, to a lot of the sort of heroines that we now see on screen. Women really started to become more popular on the big screen and on TV as a result, I think, of characters like Catwoman being portrayed in the early days of television and film.
Today, happily, from what I have seen and read, you have superheroes, superheroines, supervillains, supervillainesses, all on a level playing field.
I think anytime you can make the character strong, whether they're male or female, you'll end up with a good villain.
It should come as no surprise, no coincidence really, that the more popular heroes are the ones who typically battle the most sinister and charismatic rogues galleries. For it's this dynamic roster of villains that bolster and buoy the popularity of our hero.
When you look at the very best characters, the very best heroes in comic book mythology, they typically have the strongest rogues gallery.
I think you develop a better rogues gallery around the superhero if the scale of the superhero is one where it's easy to imagine the villain coming into being. You look at Batman, Batman ultimately is a human being, so therefore you can have villains that face him that are human plus a little.
Batman's rogues gallery, which I actually think to be is the best rogues gallery of sort of all the DC heroes, that resonates the most. And I think those characters are considered, sort of the greater villains. There's an interesting thing about a lot of Batman's rogues, and here I'm specifically thinking of like the Penguin and Two-Face and Clayface and the Joker. They're all physically deformed in some way. And that physical deformity actually drives their evil.
Massively more difficult to have villains of scale for Superman. Character's incredibly powerful. Who's tough enough to fight him?
Brainiac felt like a character could actually fight Superman and win without superpowers because he's a computer. He's a computer character.
So, you must be Brainiac. Okay.
Brainiac was an alien who was collecting cities of different world cultures as he moved throughout the galaxy, throughout the universe. And he comes to Earth to shrink Metropolis, among other cities, and put it in a glass bottle and take it in his interplanetary collection back to wherever he may have come from.
We didn't want it to always be Lex Luthor that was fighting Superman or Brainiac, but then you start running out of the famous names, so we kept coming up with new guys,
The parasite, he becomes this individual who draws power from others. Draws superpower from Superman or other superheroes he was around. He draws life force from other people, sometimes even identity from other people.
I think Metallo's a really interesting villain, and a large part of why I like him is because he was human, but now he's got this kryptonite heart. So he still has a heart, but it's a deformed heart. It's a obscene heart. It's a heart of evil. And that heart affects what he does, and it has such a massive effect on Superman.
But when you run into characters like Superman and Wonder Woman, the rogues galleries get a lot smaller. Wonder Woman in particular has a very small gallery because of who she is and what she represents, and how she become more iconic in her own rights makes it harder to play off of her weaknesses, because a lot of people don't see perceived weaknesses in the character, so there's no major villainy that can exploit those weaknesses in her.
We added another layer to Wonder Woman's origin by making her the daughter of Zeus. So she has divine blood. And then we want to take it even further. And it's like, well, let's create somebody new, a new god. And it is, we created this character called the Firstborn. He has no name. He was the first child of Zeus and Hera. And he was cast out of Olympus because there was a prophecy that he would take over Olympus. So here's her original brother, who's been cast out of heaven, hated by all. So now he's got a major hate on for his family and the world.
Just as heroes will bond together to fight a common enemy, so too will the villains. The fusion of good is matched only by the unification of evil, the crime syndicate, the secret society, the rogues, the Legion of Doom. Though their members differ, all villain team-ups employ the same battle-tested strategy. There is strength in numbers.
My favorite aspect of working in this business is when I have created various incarnations of various teams. All right, we need one character who can fly. We need one character who's really strong. We need one character who's maybe got some magical powers. And just putting that together is half the challenge. The story writes itself more often than not after that.
The opening of the challenge of the Super Friends, where you've got the Justice League members marching and towards the screen, and then on the other side, the Legion of Doom are all in rank file marching, and they're coming at each other, and there's this big explosion when the two sides hit each other. I mean, as a 6-7-year-old kid, it blew your mind.
Normally, villains are seen as individuals, and they have their own personal plot to, take over the world or something like that. But the idea of them combining together, makes their threat that much bigger.
Super villain team-ups are their own unique animal. Because on the one hand, it's right, there's a huge potential and disappointment ratio when supervillains team up. The potential is, well, it's two great tastes that taste great together. It's two threats are better than one. When Lex Luthor and Brainiac team up, when the Joker and the Riddler team up, that's incredibly, resonant and powerful. The problem is that 99.9% of the time, the ability of the superhero to overcome their plan is usually hidden in the conflict between the supervillains. The supervillains just, they can't get their act together. If a comic book is 22 pages, they can get their act together for 19 pages, but those last 3 are just, they're just falling apart.
I'd like to complete this transaction with as little bloodshed as possible, Lex. Now put your hands up and have Toyman turn us around.
Don't look at him, big boy. Grodd is leader.
The rogues are a little bit different. The rogues can come together for a common goal.
They're guys that seem silly at first, but you look at somebody like Mirror Master. Okay, the guy can teleport through any reflective surface, not just a mirror. He can bend light, illusions. I mean, there's so many things. He can make himself appear in multiple places at once. I mean, there's so many very interesting things that he can do on his own that when you put him into a group with a bunch of other villains that are also extremely versatile, you have a really cool set of personalities and powers.
Although they do have specific rivalries. Heatwave and Captain Cold don't like each other. Yeah, one's hot and one's cold, but there are other reasons. In our Flash run, all of the rogues, they used to have guns and wands and mechanical devices dating back to when they were originally created. Well, we made them have superpowers. And it's because of Captain Cold. He made them undergo this transformation that gave them superpowers. Well, it had negative side effects. For poor Heatwave, it burnt off basically all the top layer of his skin, so he looks really gross and messed up. So he hates Captain Cold for making him look that way.
Why do they hang out together? well, there's strength in numbers, and Flash is fast enough, he can fight more than one person at a time. But the rogues, there's something about the rogues. They just want to pull their jobs, live their lives, and be left alone.
Like, it's their job to pull off heists and steal stuff. And that's how they make their living. Like, they consider themselves blue-collar guys. We're going to pop a beer, and then, you know, we're going to spend the money that we made by robbing the bank.
What other villains can you think about? Like, they pull a heist, they escape the Flash, and then they go to a bar to have a beer.
I think that Suicide Squad is the exception to the rule. And what makes that interesting is it's a bunch of villains who are forced by the government to go on missions that are for the good of the people. And if they fail, if they decide to try and escape, they have devices that will kill them. So they're forced to do it. I think the fact that they are forced to be heroes despite their own instincts, and the fact that they're constantly trying to work out ways to undermine their own missions and to sometimes betray their teammates and be villains even while they're forced to do the right thing, is the reason why that team and that book is always around and is always popular.
None of their motivation is theirs. They're doing the bidding of Amanda Waller and the government.
Are the people that are planting these bombs on the backs of the Suicide Squad members, are they the heroes? You know, purportedly they are, but the way they're doing it, it really, you know, comes down to it's an extreme form of waterboarding, I think.
They have reason to hate their handlers, who are supposed to be the good guys, but they're not seen that way in the book. So it's an interesting study in what makes a villain and what makes a hero, because it's kind of flip-flopped in that book.
They're not there to personally screw the other guy standing next to them. They're there to just survive. And they don't want it to be their suicide mission. And I do think that that's a different and new angle.
Suicide Squad is successful because it has a rotating cast. Of course, you can kill some members off. So there's always that question of something happening to that cast that could change the status quo. There's always that anticipation that if a mission goes wrong, somebody could actually die.
It's a gut-level survival instinct. For the reader, you're just like, who's going to make it through this mission? And how? You know? And then, you know, are they going to manage to actually get free so they can take care of Amanda Waller?
Sometimes it's more exciting to find a villain that's so powerful the combined might of an entire team can't defeat them.
So the superheroes and the supervillains actually have to band together, you know, put aside their differences. And then you always have that classic shot where they reach out and shake hands with one another, like, all right, let's team up. And to me, that's like the ultimate odd couple.
The problem is, though, that there aren't that many of those kind of villains. So it's always a challenge to find one villain that is powerful enough to take out all of them. It's interesting that someone like Lex Luthor could probably do it just because he has the skill to outthink them. So it isn't always power. Sometimes it's that X factor. But if you can manage to do the right storyline, it can be a lot of fun and a really great challenge.
I'm not here to challenge you, Darkseid. Quite the contrary. I've got something you want. The only thing you want.
I think people can identify with that because when we're faced with something that is endangers our way of life, we can set aside our differences and work together.
A fine line exists between a hero and villain, and sometimes the line is crossed. In essence, the hero becomes the villain. But when a hero loses their way, is salvation possible?
One of the great classic stories of literature is the drama of the good man goes bad. What is it that can happen to us that puts us through a set of circumstances that drives us to do something we don't morally believe in? That's a powerful tale.
Trying to turn a hero, you have to actually figure out how to affect their moral center.
It's in the face of a planet being blown up, a city being blown up, a wife or a lover dying. And the idea that I wasn't strong enough, I wasn't powerful enough, and perhaps me doing the right thing and being a hero was the problem. If I'd been more vicious, if I'd been more brutal, maybe I could have changed things. I think every great turn of a hero to a villain it comes from that.
In Injustice, the storyline is that the Joker has killed Lois, and it's not just Lois's death that drives Superman to almost a level of insanity, but the fact that Lois was carrying his child, and so it has double significance and impact on him.
That's enough.
At that point, he kind of loses his frame of reference and decides to create almost a totalitarian state where he is the ultimate authority. And so again, in his mind, he is trying to prevent what happened to Lois and his unborn child from happening in the world by becoming, the enlightened dictator. But, you can see sort of the holes in logic of that. Ultimately, you are creating a greater evil by trying to do some small sense of good.
There have been a few stories where heroes go villainous for some time, and I think probably the most famous one is Hal Jordan. When Coast City, the city he called home, was attacked, and many people were just killed and destroyed, and he wanted to bring them back. And he went to the Guardians and said, give me this power so I can do it. And they said no, and he ultimately killed them and went crazy, became this big villain in the DC universe.
They say that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Usually when a hero falls from grace, it's because they've succumbed to their own power. Like when Hal Jordan became Parallax, it was Hal Jordan overreaching and trying to use his power as the Green Lantern to recreate an entire city, and he kept wanting more and more power, and he basically got corrupted by his own, by his own superpower. And I think that is usually the path down, down darkness.
Through becoming the Spectre and ultimately becoming Green Lantern again, he found redemption, but it took years, and it was a great hero's journey that we got to witness.
Hal Jordan was always about overcoming fear. And I thought, well, if he's all about overcoming fear, there's got to be a moment that he gave into fear. And when was that weakness? And that weak point was when he was worried something else was going to happen once Coast City was destroyed. And in that moment, he let fear kind of take hold of his heart. That's when Sinestro unleashed Parallax, who was we created this entity of terror that could possess his soul and corrupt his body, and essentially turn him into Parallax. And by having Hal still make a mistake and give in to fear, it was still on point and gave him a point of failure. But at the same time, adding Parallax allowed for an easier redemption.
So if a hero does cross the line, does he just go back to work the next day? The idea was no. It was a 10-year problem for him.
Comic books, by I think their basic nature, is about wish fulfillment. Therefore, the concept of second chances is actually built into the very concept of the type of material we do. So the idea that a hero or villain could be redeemed is exactly what comics have to be about. We can take bad and turn it good, and we can make good even better. And that's what comics and fantasy storytelling is all about.
Cry for Justice began with a bunch of heroes trying to track down Prometheus. Prometheus has actually taken the identity of one of the heroes, so he actually is amongst them the entire time. At the end of it, Prometheus has worked out a way to destroy most of Star City, which is Green Arrow's home. He also maims Arsenal, and then ultimately Arsenal's daughter is killed. What happens at the very end is the one moderate person, Green Arrow, then tracks down Prometheus on his own and executes him. And that then led to a long arc for Green Arrow where he had to redeem himself.
Green Arrow crossed the line and took the life of a villain. He did not just come back from that adventure and say, oh, well, I'm never going to kill people again. He had a mental breakdown, and we did a year and a half long story where he lost it. And it was to show that there's consequences for this kind of stuff. I do think that in modern comics, it's okay for the heroes to fail. You just got to have it mean something, and not just teach them something, but have them suffer because they did something wrong.
Taking someone's life, you take away all they're ever going to have and all they ever will be, and that's, and it stays with you even if you do it for the right and proper thing. So, killing in comics is, when the hero pulls the trigger, I think it It's not done a lot, but I think when it's done, it has to be done in a real big way that has an emotional punch to the hero's psyche and soul.
After we've witnessed such heinous crimes, after we've experienced firsthand pure evil in the face of villainy, can the evildoer be redeemed? In this comic book world where heroes often get second chances, can the villain ever be forgiven?
It's a lot harder to figure out how somebody who spent years taking what they wanted, killing people, whatever set of misdeeds, will suddenly turn around and find God and become moral the rest of their lives. Does it happen? Probably does in reality, but it's a real tough story to tell.
Black Adam is an interesting character. He was chosen by the wizard Shazam, given powers back in the ancient Egyptian days. He was a slave in Kandak. He took these powers, became Black Adam, the champion, and he was a hero, and over time he was corrupted by that power. He went back to Kandak and he said, I'm leading Kandak now, you are free, I'm here. And then he found someone he fell in love with. Isis was born, and then Isis's brother Osiris, like we kind of created a Black Adam family. And then that family was torn apart, and they were killed. And Isis, who had been such a great presence for Adam, who had preached peace and this and that, as she's dying in his arms, the last words she says is, avenge us. And that sends Black Adam off. And he kills an entire country out of rage. And obviously, hard to redeem somebody after that. He believes in doing the right thing. He just goes about it in such a barbaric and awful way.
Pete Tomasi wrote a fantastic story wrapped around a character everybody should hate, and made him, a hero in a very, from a very villainous past.
It's a weird spot to be in when you're a writer, when you have to say, I just committed genocide, but I have to make this character relatable and in a weird way have people understand where he was coming from at that point. So it's a tough line to walk when you're a writer, writing a character who's as three-dimensional as Black Adam, because he really is one of those really great three-dimensional characters that you could horribly understand why he does something.
With villains, though, when you try and turn them into heroes, they can lose what makes them special. So it's a very rare case where a villain is better as a hero. Most of the time, most readers just can't wait for them to be villainous again.
Recently, when we worked on Dark Knight Returns, where we have Dr. Wolper trying to bring the Joker back and trying to work with him. And now Dr. Wolper also has an enormous ego. And so you've got Joker's ego, Wolper's ego. It doesn't work out well. It doesn't work out well for Wolper. But the Joker absolutely was all about, I am rehabilitated, I'm here, I've seen the error of my ways, and he really just used that as a manner to get himself out of Arkham so he could commit tremendous crimes.
I think some of them can be redeemed, but I think what you got to do is you got to dangle a sense of redemption in front of them and then rip it away, because ultimately you show why they were a villain in the first place.
As society continues to evolve, so too do our villains. In September of 2011, DC relaunched its entire line of comics, dubbed the New 52.
2 years ago, we relaunched the DC Universe. We called that the New 52, and it was basically a soft reset of the universe where we basically fixed the things that we felt weren't working and kept going with the things that were. We really sat down and thought about, well, what do we need more of in the DC Universe? And one of the things that we wanted to address was the villains.
What is villainy to us in 2013? What is real evil in 2013? It's horrendous, right? And sometimes if you get too close to the reality of it, it takes you out of the comic book. So using supervillains as metaphors for whatever that is, and for the brutal attacks that they do, it's gotten darker, it's clearly darker, and it's scarier. And the attacks come without notice sometimes, and they're personal.
I think that's because we live in a very sort of, fearful time. Ever since 9/11, the world's been on edge, and no one knows when the next shoe's going to drop. Is it going to be a tsunami? Is it going to be, economic collapse? And villains that sort of embody that sense of unpredictability, that sense of, doom can come in any form and at any time. I think that sort of speaks to everyone's sort of hidden fears.
Instead of characters of good and evil, it became about characters of order and chaos. It became about anarchy.
We are artists, and we're trying to reflect what's going on in the world. That's what all art does. It's a mirror.
While DC's rogues gallery of villains is already enormous, there's always room for a little more evil. With the advent of the new 52, the heroes of the DC universe must face new threats and adversaries.
I have a strange belief about the way one proceeds with comics is to using old characters and introducing new characters. My belief is if you're going to use one or two old characters, you have to introduce a new one. I don't think we should ever be so content to keep riding on the same horse. If the hero has to survive for 16, 20, 30 years, you want to know all the different aspects of that character, and the villain will make them face certain parts about themselves that on their own they may not even think about or can come up in a storyline. But a villain will find that because they're always trying to find something new to use against the hero, which makes you explore your hero even more.
The goal of any villain is to challenge our hero, right? Actually, not to challenge him, but to take him to the ragged edge of his existence in every way.
The idea is to try and think about what the character is most afraid of at that particular moment in his or her life, the hero, and then create a villain that comes right at that thing. So for Court of Owls, that story was really about, a moment when Batman was on top of the world and he felt very confident in Gotham. And it made me realize, well, Batman might think he knows the city, but he can't know the history of the city. He can't know everything about it. And so what if the city itself begins to come at him saying, you don't know me that well. So with the Court of Owls, they're this sort of group buried and layered into the past of the city in ways that I think is scary to him. First, he doesn't believe they exist at all, and then he sees that they actually have nests for their talons inside Wayne buildings. And then in the sort of penultimate scene, he realizes that the person behind the story is actually someone who claims to be a Wayne himself.
The Guardians of the Universe were characters that they're ancient beings, billions of years old, that divorced themselves from emotion a long time ago because they thought emotion was dangerous. They always say the law is supposed to be devoid of emotion. The First Lantern is the being who got the first ring, who was there to witness the divorcing of the Guardians and their emotional hearts. And he took that emotional power for himself. And it changed who he was. And the Guardians imprisoned him and locked him away like they did their emotions. The First Lantern is a metaphor for all the pent-up emotion the Guardians have buried. And that First Lantern is now free. At one point, the First Lantern says, as he's got them captured, he's turned the tables, and he says, I'm going to change this universe now, but before I do, I want you to have your emotions back. I want you to feel this. And the Guardians, for the first time in billions of years, have their emotions back, and they feel shame and fear and horror about what they've done and what they've become, which I really enjoy. And then that's right before Sinestro wipes them out. Originally, when I got an Aquaman and I was launching Aquaman for the New 52, my attitude was he wants to be on land. So he made a conscious decision in issue 1, my life is on land here. And I wanted to have something that was going to drag him back into the ocean. So we created, Ivan Reis and I created this race of sea creatures, humanoid sea creatures, man-eating creatures that were starving, and they were from the trench, and they had eaten all their food down there, and they were coming up for something else. And they come up out of the ocean, and they attack a town, and Aquaman gets involved with that attack and has to go back into the water. And what Aquaman doesn't know is that they're actually another kingdom. They're actually another underwater kingdom that is one of many with Atlantis.
Although it was spawned from comics, the DC universe isn't limited to panels and pages. It has expanded to include all forms of media and given its villains new worlds to explore.
DC Comics isn't just comics, It starts in the comics, all the characters come from the comics, but then they explode into everything else.
If it wasn't for these amazingly rich and complex and multi-layered villains that we had to craft our stories around, and what is driving you through the story, what is pushing Batman, to push his limits to get to the end of the game, is ultimately the plan and the storytelling around the villain and the villain's interactions with each other as they all try to take down Batman.
You had your shot, Deathstroke, but you're not the only assassin in town.
There's such rich material here and such deep, amazing characters that have such long history and love from the fans for 50, 60, 70 years that we want to tell great stories in our games. We don't want it to just be about the gameplay and cool visuals. There's got to be the meat there of a great story.
To me as a fan, it's a lot of fun to see that because it really explores the world of these characters and it doesn't just give you one flavor month in, month out.
The future, including the upcoming Forever Evil comic event, will continue to emphasize the villains and their many diabolical deeds.
As DC celebrates its villainy, we're doing the first new 52 event series. I'm writing it, David Finch is drawing it. It's called Forever Evil. And the context of this is the Justice League is dead, the villains have inherited the Earth. They've been killed by the crime syndicate. So we create an event that now carries on throughout the rest of 2013 and in 2014 that's all about the villains.
When we looked at the whole lineup of characters, it really came down to why does this character exist in the DC Universe? What role does this character fill? How do we show that function through story, through character development?
Seeing all the villains manifest themselves in animation and television and film and video games from the comic books, that's the true power and testament to the characters themselves.
The super villains of DC Comics come in all manners of shapes, sizes, personalities, dark recesses, and eccentricities. They conquer worlds, eradicate cities, and terrorize the innocent, all while fighting the hero. And it's this bond between villain and hero that is inseparable, unbreakable, a fusion of soul, a sense of feeling, a deeply rooted connection that cannot be extricated. Theirs is a war of intellect, of strength, of darkness, an intertwined fate and destiny to keep doing battle. They can't give up on each other. For without the hero, there is no villain. Without a villain, there can be no hero.